and if you hear like stuff in the background, I was trying to wait until noise went away, but you know, this is my street. You're gonna get, you know, constant noise. You know, just how it goes. I want to leave the window open a little bit just to get some air, but you know, shit happens. So anyways, I wanted to do this video where I'm discussing, I tried to come up with like 10 heroes that are, I would say, like my favorite, you know, heroes. Like, just like the way they either, something about them that I really liked or liked for the heroine. You know, like they did something for the heroine that made me happy. And so I'm like, oh, I like these heroes. So the first one I would say has been my favorite for years is Derek Craven from Dreaming of You. Now, he first was introduced in the book before that, which was, I think it was Then Came You, I think. He was first introduced there. And so he had a more pronounced like English accent when it came to like what they said. I think they said Cockney, like a Cockney accent. So it's definitely more of like, hello, governor kind of thing, you know. So, you know, it's not as, I guess you'd say, refined, because he came from literally the streets. You know, he was, I believe, born to a prostitute. And so he grew up very poor. And so he did all kinds of things in order to acquire his wealth. So I think the thing I liked about him the most is that he was a very morally gray character. So he, of course, did some underhanded stuff and things like that. And then Sarah, you know, came into his life and really changed things for him. You know, not only did, you know, he get to the point of like, I don't want to, you know, if you haven't read the book, I don't want to give away too much, but he went from like owning a gambling, you know, place to operating other things, you know, opening up other things that I thought were more decent, you know, good for humanity instead of like vices and things like that. But I think I liked his character a lot because he was very unapologetic. I think that's what I could say. I thought his character was very unapologetic. He didn't go and apologize for the fact that he was the way he was. To me, I have respect for somebody who comes from nothing and they work their butt off to get where they are. You know, I love self-made people. I don't see too many of those nowadays. A lot of times you see a lot of what you'd call Nepo babies. A lot of Nepo babies or people who were born with wealth, so they never had to work hard. And that's the thing I like about seeing about a hero. I like seeing a fictional hero who is very hardworking, you know, very hardworking, does what he can to get where he is, you know. And some of those things may not be the best, you know. When it came to Derek Craven, you know, he did do some, like I said, underhanded things, you know, that weren't exactly great. But I mean, there's a lot of people out there who do things to get where they're at, you know, and they don't always go by the book, you know. But I really loved his character and his obsession that he started to get with Sarah, where I would say she brought out the good in him. She brought out the good in him. She brought out the man that he was meant to be, you know? And so I really love his character. He's a great character. People may not like him, but that's fine. Like, this is based on like me and my tastes, you know? So the next one, I will say most of these are Lisa Kleypas characters. I'll just say that because there's a lot of them I've loved over the years. So next one I would say is Sebastian St. Vincent from Devil in Winter. Now, he wasn't much of a good boy in the previous novel. It happened one autumn when he went and kidnapped Lily Bowman. Was it Lillian Bowman? I think it was Lillian. Yeah, Lillian. He kidnapped her so that way he could try to marry her, get her to Gretna Green and marry her because he needed a wife. And so that didn't work out. And so, of course, he had his own romance with, it was Evie, right? Evie. Yeah. Sometimes I'm bad with names. But I loved his character because he could have been a real scumbag to her. Like, he really could have been a real scumbag to her because he tried to play off that he was this bad, villain, he tried to play it off very much. Like, if you haven't read the books, like, he wasn't really a bad guy, but he definitely, like, tried to play up that role of, like, trying to be the villain, and he very much was not. So I really liked multiple things that he did in that book, to show that he really wasn't the villain that he claimed to be. One scene I particularly love was after him and Evie get married. Yeah, I'm thinking of something else. After they get married, he goes and she wants to take off this thing that they had bound to them, as like a marriage thing. And he's like, no, keep it on, and like, and it was just shocking that I was like, oh, wow, he actually wants her to keep that on their wrists. You would think that somebody who's doesn't care, would just have no problem taking it off. But you could see the cracks right at the beginning that he wasn't a bad man, And so I love that scene right there, where he kind of like is like, no, keep it on. And she wants to take it off. And then he ends up kissing her. And then you have another scene where her cousin is trying to kidnap her because her cousin's family basically wanted to marry her off. So that way they can go and acquire her father's fortune. So she's in this carriage. She's in this carriage. Mine just went bling. She's in this carriage, and her cousin's trying to hold her down, and Sebastian kind of like rips the door open and is like, give her to me. And he's just saying like all these things to him, like, basically like, I'm gonna gut you like a fish kind of thing, And I was like, oh, I love his character. He was very protective of her, and I love that he was protective of her, and he didn't need to be. He already had married her and already was able to acquire her fortune. He could have just left her, wherever. It didn't matter. He took over her father's gambling hall, the gambling establishment, and fixed it up, because it was not doing well. And there were so many things that showed throughout the book that he really wasn't, like I said, he really wasn't the villain that he tried to portray himself to be. And that's the thing I liked about him. And, when there was this scene where he's telling her, like, look, I'm not gonna, I won't sleep around, he won't acquire mistresses, and she like doesn't want to believe him. So he's like, fine, I'll stay abstinent, for how long. So I love that aspect to it too. And then also I have to mention, he saved her life. He took a bullet for her, so that to me is like, I love Sebastian St. Vincent. He did so much for her that I just was like, yeah, I love his character. So the next one I would say is this one here is a Ruby Dixon character. Now this character was it Jarruru? So it's J-R-R-R-U, Jarruru. So it's a part of When She's Weary. This is a part of the Rista 3 Planet series. If you read Ruby Dixon, she has multiple series. And this one here is like almost sort of connected to her original ones that have to do with like the not Hoth planet, like the Ice Planet Barbarians and things like that. They're like interconnected in a way. So this one here has it to where these ladies all have been pretty much rescued from alien slavery, and they're put on this planet that's run by this alien prince or king or something like that. I think he might be a king. And so he's running the planet, and he's taking care of these women to make sure they're protected. And since they can't be returned to Earth, you know, he has to basically try to make the best of it for them, you know. So all of these ladies are pretty much like, a lot of them are scarred from past things happened to them. Like either they've gotten beaten or they were repeatedly assaulted, you know, sexually and all that stuff. So they're very much like scared heroines that really needed a sense of peace. So with the heroine, I didn't write her name, but the heroine, I really wanted someone like good for her. So I love the fact of that character of Jarrell, that he came along and he very much was, I guess you'd say, stubborn, but very patient with the heroine, because the heroine dealt with a lot of abuse from her captors before. And so it made her very bitter, very mistrusting, really leery about trusting people. And so he came along, and he was basically a part of like this cat species, which I can never picture fully. I'll just say that. Like if I picture a cat face, it just creeps me out. It just creeps me out. But you know, I picture like something else, you know, like maybe more of like, oh, I'm trying to think. You know, like sort of like a feline features, but not fully a cat. Like I'm like, oh, no, a whole bunch of fur and all that stuff. It's just kind of weird. But I loved his character because, like I said, he was very patient with her, and he was funny too. Like he would do things and it would get her to smile and laugh. And that's what I think I loved about his character, is that he had brought out things in her that she probably would have never had again, you know, because she learned to trust him. And that's what I think I really appreciated about his character, was he had brought out like her, you know, personality, and brought out that trust. And so that's what, you know, when heroines are like that, they need someone that they can trust, you know. Very hard for them to trust, you know, especially when they've been hurt, you know. Once bitten, twice shy kind of thing, you know. So I really liked his character. And then the next one is definitely another Ruby Dixon character. Now this one here is Ashtar. He's from Veronica's Dragon, which was a part of the Ice Home series. I loved his character. He cracked me up throughout the whole book. Even like other books where he actually was in, he cracked me up so much. There was multiple scenes in the Veronica's Dragon that I thought was just hilarious. Like at the beginning of the book, he is so like overly cocky and confident with himself, like showing off his body. Kind of reminded me of, if you ever see the mating of like birds, you always see the males usually have the prettier feathers because they're there to attract the females. The females, usually their colors are not as bright, they're more duller because, you know, the males need a mate. So of course they have to attract the female. So if you ever see birds, they always kind of like do this like cocky, you know, like do 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 do, you know, with their heads. If you ever watch them, it's so funny. And so they very much kind of like, see my pretty feathers? Do you see my feathers? I'm a great mate. You can mate with me. That's kind of like basically what it is with birds, at least the male birds. The females just kind of sit there and just look at them like, you know, come on. It's hilarious. If you ever watch nature, birds are funny. So that's what Ashtar reminded me of. It was kind of like a peacock or a bird or you know, a pigeon or something, you know, that's like trying to impress a mate. And that's basically what he was. He kind of reminded me of that. Because he was a dragon hybrid. He could turn into a full-fledged fucking dragon and shit, you know? So I thought his character was really cool. And he was so funny. He made me laugh multiple times. Like I said, the beginning part right there where he's kind of like doing this like, you know, thing with him and walking around like, see, aren't I beautiful? You know, isn't my skin kind of beautiful? And you would think to yourself like, ugh, this fucking vain douchebag. But he is so funny to me. I just laughed hysterical reading the book. And he, you know, would do things to try to impress her, and get her to like choose him. And he became very protective of her. And I just loved his character. Even like I said, even in another book, there was another book where he was in it and he was in his dragon form. And somebody had said something to him or said something to the other one, to another character. And all of a sudden Ashtar shifted like into his human form, like humanoid form, and was like, what's this? It was so funny. I started busting up laughing where he was in his dragon form. All of a sudden his ears peak. He hears something and he changes and shifts like, oh, what's this? So he can go and laugh at their conversation. Loved his character. His character was so funny. It's probably one of my favorite heroes that, Ruby Dixon has ever done in any of her series. His character made me bust up laughing because he was so funny. He had such a great sense of humor. And like I said, he was so protective of the heroine. I just loved his character. I love rereading his book, especially because it makes me laugh. It makes me laugh. And I'm like, if a hero can make me laugh, yep, I will always, always be on your side, man, because heroes that make me laugh, I love. So the next one I would say that's a favorite of mine is Leo Hathaway from the Hathaway series. Now, the thing I love about his character is he really started off really bad. Like when we first are introduced to his character, he's an alcoholic. He's definitely like depressed, suicidal, I'd say, almost at the point, you know, because he, you know, loved somebody that ended up dying of like, oh, I think it was scarlet fever. I think that's what that's what it was. I think it was something like that. I think it was like scarlet fever or something similar. And so he ended up getting really sick from it and he survived it, but his fiance ended up dying. And so it made him very bitter and hateful of the world. And so in the first book, especially, he is not doing well. You know, his sister Amelia is very much like taking care of him and very much taking over the estate that Leo ended up inheriting from family. You know, he was I don't think he was a duke, but he definitely was, you know, had a title, you know, because their family were very humble. They came from humble means. Their parents were readers. They were, you know, intellectuals. They valued education. So they taught all of their children. And so their family, you know, came from very humble beginnings. And so when he inherited that title, he just didn't give a shit about it. You know, he didn't care. So he went from very much like hating his life, not really caring about the title, to slowly getting himself together and becoming a better person. And throughout the series, you see like these little kind of like small interactions that he had with the heroine in the, what was it, the third book? I think that might have been the third book. Or it was, no, that was the fourth book. It was the fourth book was them. And you could see throughout the series that, him improving, he quit drinking. He went and started doing his job that he was supposed to do with the estate and get the estates in order and everything like that. Because at the beginning, it very much was, with the first book in that series, it very much was Amelia and it was Cam Rohan that were taking care of that estate and fixing it up and the house and everything like that. So when Leo, I'd say between like the second and third book, he really started to clean himself up. And then when it came to his book, he already had like a little bit of a relationship with Catherine, which he called Kat. They were kind of like had this animosity with each other. Like he would constantly tease her and say things to her, and she would kind of like look at him like, with scorn of like, leave me alone kind of thing. She was the governess. And so, with this book here, with his book, you see more in depth to him of how he is. And I really liked his character because you could see like he really, loved his fiancée, and he was heartbroken for many years, and you could see like that throughout him getting to know Catherine, more of his like heart started to mend. She started to mend his heart without her even noticing it, without her even knowing, and he got to know her more of her secrets, more things that she was hiding, because she was hiding things from him, from the family, that were trying to protect herself, And so I loved how he really brought out like, the best in her, and she did the same for him, And there was a scene where he had rescued her. There was something that happened, and I don't want to give away too much in case you haven't read it yet. But he had ended up rescuing her, and they ended up getting married, and so it just was really sweet. And then they find out they're going to be have a family and everything. But I just loved his character arc, and how he ended up changing and becoming, like, he could have just kept on being this piece of shit, basically, but he really got himself together and started to become like the brother that his sister knew him to be, I just love that. And also like in the second book, he had went with his sister, for her health, because she ended up getting sick too from, like I said, I think it was scarlet fever, but it could have been something else. She ended up getting really sick to where she almost died. But she ended up surviving. And so they went and took her to this place for health, for her to, regain her health back. And so her brother had went with her for a little while and was kind of like being her like chaperone and everything, and watching out for her. So I really loved how it was very much like him getting over that alcoholism and basically healing himself, as well as making sure his sister gets healed too. And then him, finding a reason to keep going, keep going on, taking care of the title, taking care of his families, his sisters, because he had multiple sisters. And so I really liked his character growth, I really liked how he had changed for the better, for the better. So the next one, I had just recently talked about him. So this one here is Cam Rohan. I love Cam. Now, we first were introduced to Cam in Devil in Winter. He was helping Jenner, because it was a gambling establishment. He was helping to run it. And so he was almost basically adopted in, because Jenner had taken him in, was taking care of him. And so Cam was basically helping to run and all these different, like, learned all these different, like, investments and things like that. Became very smart when it came to money. And so we were introduced to him in Devil in Winter. And then we saw him a little bit in Scandal in Spring. And there actually was where you first thought, like, huh, there's a possibility that, at first we thought there was a possibility that he could have got together with Daisy, who's an American. But then it was like, it didn't shift that way. And so when we are introduced to him again in Mine Till Midnight, he gets to know Amelia. And Amelia, as I said previously, is Leo's sister. It's his sister closer to his age. And so Cam gets to know Amelia because Amelia is dealing with this estate that they ended up inheriting and all of the issues that they have. So Cam decides to help Amelia with her estate and helping her. And throughout the novel, you see, like, he's attracted to her. He wants to, be with her. And so you get to know him more and his history. And that's the thing I liked about the book, is that you got to know the history of Cam and where he actually came from. Because he's, people will say gypsy, and then, some people will say, well, that's a derogatory word. So the people will say, like, oh, well, it's better to call them Romany. So he is a Romany character. And so I really liked him a lot because he had integrity, That's the thing I liked about him a lot, is that he had integrity. He could have easily taken advantage of Jenner's generosity. He could have taken advantage of the Hathaways, but he didn't. He was a loyal man, very loyal, had integrity, and was there to be a shoulder to lean on. And I really loved his character a lot. But yeah, that one there, that first book in the Hathaway series, is really good. Getting to know his character more in depth, and the things he did for Evie, and all that stuff in her family. And they were like almost kind of like a brother and sister. So I thought that was very nice, I really liked those books a lot. Whenever they introduced him, he was a very interesting character. So I loved that he had gotten, like, his love story in the Hathaways. So the next one, I would say, of course, is another Lisa Kleypas hero, Harry Rutledge. Now, he was a part of the Tempt Me at Twilight. Now, he's very much a gray, morally gray character. He's very similar to, I would say, some of her morally gray characters are very similar in tone. I would say Harry Rutledge reminded me very similarly, whatever the word is, he reminded me a lot of Derek Craven. So Harry, he basically comes from, he comes from a family that didn't do affection and things like that. So he's very closed off. And there's other things about him that you end up finding out throughout the series too, like, his connections with someone else and everything like that. But I really liked his character because he did all kinds of, like, things to get to where he was at, because he had owned this department store. And so he was did some kind of things to get where he was at. And he would, I guess you'd say, do some manipulation and things like that to kind of get where he was and everything. And so he sees the character of, I believe it's Poppy. He sees Poppy, and she is engaged to this man. And so Harry's like, oh no, she's not going to marry him. She's going to marry me. So he does some things to where the other guy ends up having to cry off or break the engagement. And so now Harry kind of like does some things to get Poppy to marry him. But the thing I liked about him is that he tried to play off that he was this villain character. Like I said, he very much reminded me of like Derek Craven a bit, but I also was getting like, there's a character that's I think called Nicholas or Nikolai from a previous series that Lisa Kleypas did, and I really disliked his character over time because he did some stupid stuff, like he had cheated on the heroine, and I really didn't like it. So I almost felt like Lisa Kleypas created Harry Rutledge as a way of like correcting a past character she did that was very similar, like kind of similar vibes. And so Harry Rutledge was very devoted to Poppy. Like he just wanted her, And so he had, of course, did some underhanded things to get her to marry him, and then of course Poppy finds out like the truth, and so she's upset about it. And so I just liked how Harry tried to play off as like this villain role, but he really wasn't. He really actually was a very good guy, very decent man. And I really liked the fact that he liked putting together like watches and stuff like that. It's very intricate work. It's very like detailed work. He was very detail oriented and everything. And so I really liked his character a lot. And like I said, he showed more. He was like an onion, you peel away these layers to this character. And so the more like Poppy like gets to know him, she starts to open up more things about him that he really doesn't want to expose, and show like the real side of him, and make himself look weak, That's what I think it was. So I really liked that one there. I like his character, and I thought it was a really well done book. And like I said, I felt like his character was very similar to a few other characters from previous books, but I felt like Lisa Kleypas was trying to make improvements on past characters by being similar to another character, but making him a better character than what she had created in a previous novel, So another character I liked that I felt like was definitely morally gray was Sebastian Ballister. He's Lord of Scoundrels. This one here, oh man, he's a bad boy. I'll just say that. He's very naughty because he does a lot of different things. Like he gambles, he does all kinds of different stuff, and he ends up kind of having this kind of like latcher on to him, which is the heroine's brother. The heroine's brother is a bit dim-witted and goes along with kind of anything that Sebastian does, very much a follower. And so when Sebastian is introduced to Jessica Trent, I believe that's her last name, Jessica, he's immediately struck with her. Like he kind of like has played like the playboy and does all kinds of stuff. And he's been that way because you realize that when he was little, he very much was neglected by his father, and his father hated him. Like he very much had this hate toward his child because he said, oh, his child's ugly. And I'm like, that child can't help the way he was born, and you're now calling him ugly. So he very much grew up with with knowing his father thought he was ugly, thought he was worthless. And so it's like, it's no wonder his character turned out the way he was, you know, because he didn't have a good foundation, and his mother died, like, you know, when he was really young, and she had actually ran off with her lover. And so he didn't really have anybody to show him love and affection, you know, show him anything that you're supposed to show a child growing up, you know, any kind of comfort, you know. The only comfort he really had was from his staff, you know, that felt sorry for him. And so at the beginning, when you read like the prologue, you really get to know his character, and you like this poor child of how he was raised. And so I had this sense of like empathy for him, you know, throughout the book. And he started doing other things too. Like he was doing things to where it got to a point where he like scorned Jessica, you know, after he did things with her. And she found him and she shot him. And I was like, you go, girl. I loved her character. She's definitely a favorite character. But I loved his change, you know, and how he changed himself because he wanted to be a better man, you know, for Jessica. And she really changed him as a character. But I loved him. He was just such an interesting character. And he had a lot of things he didn't want to show for himself. He very much like, he wanted love, he wanted affection, but he was so scared to like find it, you know, and pursue it, you know. He very much like tried to keep himself hardened, and he really was just this mushy marshmallow on the inside. He really was. He just needed that proper, you know, woman to challenge him, you know. And Jessica very much challenged him a lot. So I really, really liked his character a lot. The next one I would say is John McKenna. This is Again the Magic's another Lisa Kleypas hero. I love Again the Magic. I love that book so much. So John McKenna grew up in the stables. He was a stable boy. He wanted to do more for himself. And he ended up becoming brokenhearted because Aline had told him she didn't want him, and she was doing it to save him. And so he ended up going off to America to make his fortune. And so he became a businessman and, you know, owned property and different things like that. And I believe it was through the underground, I think it was not Underground Railroad, but it was through like the railroad companies, I believe he had owned stuff. And so he wanted to get revenge on Aline, who broke his heart years ago. So he goes back to, you know, Europe, England, to see her again. But quickly, like very quickly, even after seeing her, after how many years, you could tell he did not want to hurt her. You know, he did not want his revenge. He still loved her, still had feelings for her. And I'd say her character did frustrate me. Her character frustrated me. But this man had his heart on his sleeve. He was so open to like basically taking her back, you know, basically having that second chance with her. And he would do anything for her. You know, you could see how devoted he was to her, even though at the beginning he had said how he hated her. He didn't. You know, he did not hate her. And all of the things that he did to show her that he cared. And yeah, there were a few maybe things that I would say he was a little oblivious to, things that she was hiding. But once she tells him and confesses to him, you could see this shift in him change, and how he, you know, everything kind of like just shifted for him. All he needed was basically the truth from her. And so she very much, you know, was a frustrating character because the things that she was hiding, that finally she said toward the end. But his you know, his pining for her, you know, his devotion to her, you know, I just really, really liked, you know? So yeah, he was definitely one of those like tragic heroes because he was just so done for her ever since he was a teen, you know, teenager. He was just done for her. And that was it for him, you know? And he even said like there were women that he bedded, that he slept with, that he kept thinking that they were her, you know? And it was like this man just for years pined for her, you know, after she had like broke his heart and everything. This man pined. This man so pined for her. And I just, yeah, I like his character a lot. I think this book is kind of like a similar, I think it was more of like almost a similar retelling to Wuthering Heights. I think that's what it was. I think it was supposed to be like a loose retelling of like Wuthering Heights. Of course, you know, definitely not a tragic ending, you know, it was more of a happy ending. So yeah, John McKenna has definitely been a favorite of mine because I love that book. I love that book. Like the things that he says to her, you know. There's like a quote at the end where he talks about, you know, that he would love her no matter what it is, like his dying breath, he will be thinking of her and saying her name. And I was just like, oh, just, yeah, that one there is like, he gets me. That one I like. So the last one, I was trying to come up with another person so I can make it 10, you know, like 10 heroes. So I kept thinking of this character right here. So this one here is Dante Frost. Now with him, I'll put up the picture here. With him here, I loved his character because he's an older man, older gentleman, and he has made his, I believe he made his money through like art galleries and stuff like that. He owned how many art galleries like in Europe and stuff. And so he came to the US for, I think it was his brother's wedding, I believe, his brother's wedding. And so, or no, it was his brother's stepdaughter's wedding. That's what it was. And so that was his, you know, step niece that he was going to the wedding for. And so he's introduced to like these sweets, you know, like he goes into this one room and sees that there's a cake, and the cake is like all decorated, like really intricately, like really detailed. And he's just very impressed. Like, man, who was the baker of this cake? It's just very impressive. You know, he's really impressed with it. And so when the heroine shows up and she's like, hey, stay away from my cake, you know, and he's like in love with her food, you know, with like her sweets. Like he is very much like a sweet fiend. He loves sweets. And so when he's introduced to her and sees like how fiery she is, you know, he's just instantly like smitten with her. And so he's like, you know, I want her to come with me to Europe, you know, to be with me in, I believe it was Italy, and make me cakes and stuff. So he basically kidnaps her. So it's called My Favorite Kidnapper. He basically kidnaps her and, you know, has her become his chef, you know, of making him cakes every day, which he ended up realizing you can't like eat cake every day, you know, you need to take a break. So I loved his persistence. I'll say that. I loved his persistence. I loved his sense of humor. He was so funny. He cracked me up in that book. And his patience with her, because she very much was like, you know, would give him the cold shoulder and stuff. I mean, can you blame her? You know, he kidnapped her. But, you know, the more she gets to know him, the more she realizes that he's a really good guy. You know, he's a really good guy, very protective of her. And he was just absolutely smitten and devoted to her. Just whatever she wanted. You know, he was like, money's no object. You know, money's no object. Whatever you need to make those sweets, to make those cakes, have at it. You could use my kitchen. You could use anything in the kitchen. I loved his character. He was just so sweet. I was like, if you can get past the kidnapping part. But yeah, he was a really great character. And I'm like, yeah, I really like him. I think about him often, you know, like I'll go back and like, I need to reread this book, you know? So right now I'm like, I'm going to be doing that where I'm going to go in and like put in like my little tabs and stuff like that. Annotate. So I need to annotate that book. But yeah, he's a good character. I really liked him. And there's other ones that I could go and mention, but I wanted to just do like just 10 for now. I figured, you know, if I can come up with like another 10, I'll do like more, you know, heroes that are like my favorites. But I also want to read more. I may develop like new favorites and stuff like that. You know, I'll come up with another a list again for heroes, but you know, I'll give it some time. You know, maybe I'll, you know, like I said, I'll find more heroes that I like, you know, that I really like, and I was like, oh, these are the ones that I'm like, I love for the heroine, you know. Especially if like you have a heroine that's very stubborn, you want someone who's very persistent, and obviously not in the creepy way, but persistent enough to where it's like she's stubborn, but she's attracted to him. You know, she's attracted to him. You know, she actually doesn't mind. She's just being, like I said, stubborn, you know? So yeah, that's it for this video here. Do you have a favorite hero in a fictional novel? Who's your favorite hero and why? Leave it down in my comment section. But yeah, that's it for this video here. Have yourselves a good day. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to each other. And I will see you all on the next video. All right. Bye.